Hello and welcome to State of the Economy. Today our guest is Mr. Patrick Kilbride. He's Executive Director, International Intellectual Property at the Global Intellectual Property Center in Washington. This is part of the US Chambers of Commerce, and he works towards bringing governments around the world together and debate intellectual property and also discuss how the best possible outcome could be derived in the sense that innovators get their due, as well as people who access new innovations and technologies, whether it is in the field of green energy or whether it's in drugs, they also get access at reasonable costs. This is the biggest challenge today in the intellectual property community worldwide. So to discuss that, we have with us Patrick Kilbride. So Patrick, tell us, you just had a conference here. You come to India twice a year, you said, and in your scheme of things, India is a major player in terms of consumer of intellectual property, future innovation, as well as producer of innovation, right? So how do you view India in the larger framework of the evolving global intellectual property regime?
Well, thank you for having me on the program. It's really a pleasure to be here, a pleasure to have the chance to visit India and meet people like yourself who are creating thought leadership around innovation and intellectual property among a host of very important economic issues. Also very exciting to be here with so much activity around Make in India, which we see as a tremendously promising program. We think, frankly, intellectual property ought to be part of the conversation because it's going to be so relevant to India's economic growth over the next several decades.
Even Startup India.
Absolutely, maybe especially
innovation
Startup
India. The basis
India.
of Startup India.
That's right, and much as in the past, the U.S. economy has been an engine for global growth, and maybe in the past 15 years, China has played that role. We see looking forward that India could be, maybe should be the next big global driver, and a commitment to a stronger intellectual property model we believe is going to be an important part of positioning India to play that role. That's important not just for the Indian economy and the benefit of more than 1 billion Indian citizens, but the rest of the world can benefit from that as well.
Sure. So, you've spoken about the India's new IPR policy, which is awaited by global investors, and as you said, global investors think that Make in India can be a success, or Startup India can be a success only if India in some sense aligns with the global intellectual property regime, right? So where do you locate India in that context? As per your, I read somewhere that you do rate countries in terms of the protection they offer to IPRs. India ranks at the moment pretty low there. So how do you read that?
So you're exactly right. I'm, of course, part of the Global Intellectual Property Center at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and we represent a group of multinational companies as well as many hundreds, even thousands of small businesses based in the United States, but increasingly who we're speaking for on a global level is companies that do business around the world and helping facilitate a business environment where they can invest and help countries succeed in terms of their own growth and development. For India, we've looked at a series of objective indicators that help to capture the overall legal and regulatory environment for innovators. And that includes patents, copyrights, trademarks. It includes trade secrets and enforcement of intellectual property laws, as well as participation in international treaties that help to shape the global environment. And historically, India has performed fairly poorly on that index.
Why? I mean,
well, because there's been a different set of policy choices, and it would be it would not be right to say there's good choices and bad choices. They're just different choices. But those choices have consequences. And there is a proven track record. If you look at countries in Europe, Japan, the United States, as well as countries like Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, they've invested in an IP model and they've shown that IP leads to more innovative output. Well, India could be a source of more innovative output. And we think India has only reached the tip of the iceberg in terms of its innovative capacity. Having a stronger IP model, as reflected by our index, which really provides a roadmap of sorts, could really help India fulfill its innovative potential in a much greater degree in the future.
Patrick, I find it interesting that you didn't make a value judgment. You didn't say good choice or bad choices that India might be making in its policy or regulation or laws. You said different choices which have consequences. I find that interesting because indeed we are making choices because our parliament, our lawmakers have driven certain choices. For instance, our IPR regime in relation to drugs, pharmaceutical products, has been debated in Parliament, and our patent regime, Patent Act, which came out many years ago, after all the debate in Parliament, said that India could, in the event of emergencies, in the event of public emergencies, it could do compulsory licensing of drugs. It could even do it for other developing countries. Now, whether you like it or not, that has emerged as a model, a new model within the developing world. And if you see the Africans, they are very, very big on it. But the pharmaceutical companies in the West do not like it. Our Parliament has debated that. There's a commitment in Parliament by this government that we cannot change what was passed earlier. So where do you see a trade-off there?
Well, first of all, I think it's important that we think about what we're trying to do with intellectual property laws. Ultimately, you're trying to do two things, right? You want to first maximize innovative output, and second, maximize access to the products of that innovation.
At reasonable costs, yeah.
Right, of course. And the fact is that at the very cutting edge of technology, whether it's in the pharmaceutical space or many others, it does cost a lot of money to research and develop new products, and especially in the pharmaceutical space, then to test them to prove that they're safe and to prove that they're effective. And in the vast majority of cases, the private sector is bearing those costs.
You have to recover the costs.
So unless they're able to recover the costs, then there's no new investment. So there's one very easy way to make all medicine cheap, and that's to stop making new medicines. But nobody thinks that that's the right answer. So clearly there's a balance, as you suggested, to be found.
Yeah. So Patrick, how do you see medicines? Again, I'm taking some time to talk about medicines because medicines are a big issue in our country, right? We still have about 50-60% of the population living below $1.50 a day. So cheap medicines are a big political issue here. Now, what about medicines which have run through their patent tenure and they are off patents? Now, India's complaint is that many pharmaceutical companies, after the drugs have come off patents and become what you call generics, they are still trying to make some incremental innovation and trying to project that as a substantive innovation, and trying to extend the patents, what is called evergreening in the language of the experts. And in this regard, the highest court in India, the Supreme Court, has also come up with judgments ruling against foreign companies which are trying to evergreen their patents by making small innovations, not substantive. So where do you stand on this? Do you think that you could, bodies such as yours, could persuade global companies to at least restrain themselves from maximizing the profits on drugs which have come off patents?
So
is that a possibility?
I'm glad you raised this because this is an area where I think India has a lot of innovative potential with the strength of the generic industry and its ability to look at existing molecules and most
India is already in the space. In fact, 30% of the generics in the U.S.
Right.
are, I guess, exported by Indian companies.
That's right, and generics make up 86% of all pharmaceutical products sold in the United States.
So why is this area why is this area so contentious when it is very clear that off-patent drugs?
Well, let's be honest. The vast majority of all molecules or pharmaceutical molecules that have ever been discovered are now off-patent, and yet there's a tremendous amount of new applications that could be made of those if companies, if private sector firms or governments, if they're willing to spend the money, invest in the research and development to figure out what those new uses are and then do the testing, which is very expensive. It's not necessarily any less expensive to find a new use for an existing molecule than it is for a new innovative discovery. And so
new uses of existing molecule can be as expensive as a new molecule.
Absolutely, because it's a large part of the cost is in the clinical trials and the reporting that the company has to do to governments to prove that they're safe and effective. So a policy like India's Section 3D, which the evergreening is a misleading term because once a patent on the original molecule is expired, it's expired. You can't extend it. What you can do in most countries, we have what we would consider a stronger system, is to get a new patent on the new development, the new use. And that encourages companies to continue to spend research and development dollars on those existing off-patent molecules. Otherwise, there's no incentive for that research to take place. We think that's a shame. And it's an area where Indian generic companies could really have a competitive advantage in the global market.
So what do you think could be done in this space to find that golden mean, as you said, between the innovator and the people who access the innovations, whether it's in medicines or any other segment?
Well, we think we've seen some very important steps in the last year in terms of the government's work to establish some specialized IP courts that create a track record of jurisprudence. We've seen efforts to reduce administrative backlogs at the patent office. We've seen the...
You're happy with India in those respects?
Well, those are important steps and important signals, but what we need to see now is some of those policy trends institutionalized through new legislation, new regulations that create legal certainty for the innovators. And the big problem that we've seen from the international investment community is that there's been a sense that at any moment the rules could change, that there was a certain degree of arbitrariness or instability. And I think the Modi administration has taken important steps, certainly to stabilize the environment. And we need to give important credit for that.
Has Modi administration given any assurance to global investors through you, perhaps, or conveyed through you, that there could be an amendment to the IPR law as it exists today?
Well, we're certainly hopeful that the end result of this national IPR policy process will be a vision for India of an IP-led innovation model. We're really waiting to see the final document and understand what's in it before we can really draw any conclusions.
Okay. So when do you expect the final document to come?
I wish I knew. Maybe you can tell me.
Have they told you that they maybe by this year? And as you said, because if Make in India or if new investments, especially in innovation, etc., are contingent upon a new national policy with legal changes, then surely they must have conveyed to you some time frame within which they would come out with a new policy?
Well, I think we have the same understanding that everyone here does, which is that the policy is under review by the cabinet, and that with the appropriate sign-offs from the various ministries that we'll see a document. As to when, it's been about a 18 month process so far, and as we had a conversation earlier with one of the participants in the think tank who shared that it's a very thorough and deliberative process, and so her view was that 24 months was not too long a time. However, you've got to also recognize that every moment lost is an opportunity cost.
Sure, yeah. Patrick, now moving away from, say, drugs and medicines to another area where a lot of debate, a lot of discussion has happened even at the Paris climate change talks, where India is participating in a big way to, or India wants to be part of an emerging, evolving new green technology, global green technology regime. There also IPRs are a big issue. And in the context of climate change, our Prime Minister, when he was in Paris last December, he did say that something as critical as climate change and new technologies which mitigate climate change, something as critical as that cannot be purely be judged on commercial terms. If it's a question of the Earth's survival, the very survival of the Earth, then there has to be some other model which enables transfer of technology, which gives the innovator his due, his or her due, as well as we said, creates easy access, right? So, do you think in the context of climate change, it can happen through a global fund, a technology fund, where the innovator gets paid, but everybody contributes to a fund depending on their how they may have used carbon space historically so far, and maybe give a little leeway to the developing world. Do you think such models are possible?
That kind of innovative thinking is absolutely necessary to tackle some of the challenges that we face globally, whether it's energy, whether it's disease, whether it's poverty, climate change. So yes, it's important that all of us, all the stakeholders in the international community, are thinking creatively about how we get how we first incentivize the investment necessary to create these new technologies, but then how we make sure access is widely available. But
so
don't
funding,
kill the goose that laid the golden egg,
huh?
right?
Global?
Don't kill the goose that laid the golden egg. You have to first protect the innovative output. Then you can figure out the access part, because there's not one without the other.
So in that context, do you think the much touted promised global fund, $100 billion every year from 2022 or thereabouts, which has been talked about as part of the larger climate change compact, do you think that could be used to sort of to give innovators their due, as well as create access for the billions of poor that reside in the developing world?
I think anything that governments can do is going to be important, but ultimately history has shown us that government investment tends to be a drop in the bucket compared to the amount of resources that the private sector invests in innovation. So is it going to be an important piece? Yes. Is it going to be a substitute? Absolutely not. We're going to continue to need to see the private sector investing in research and development, and to make that happen, you also have to have the ability to have a commercially viable product.
The private sector plays the lead role, invests, but this global fund could be used to give the necessary subsidy on behalf of the poorer countries, and the private sector is compensated, right? They need, at the end of the day, they want compensation for their innovation, right?
Well, and I think in cases whether it's medicines or climate technologies, what have you, the private sector is always very willing to work with governments to make things work. They don't create products to put them on a shelf. They create new products to get them into the hands of the people that can use them. And they make a profit doing so, and that enables them to continue to invest in the next generation of technologies and products.
True, Patrick. I mean, if what you're saying is true, one would be happy to have that model. But the perception in most of the developing countries is that global pharma companies or maybe global green technology companies, they do hanker after super profits. They're not happy with normal profits. They want supernormal profits, which is why one argument is that this whole trans-Pacific trade agreement is being signed where the charge is, the accusation is that it is being driven by global companies, pharma companies. Therefore, the TPP agreement has much more liberal conditions on IPR, which doesn't exist in the WTO. So, in some ways, the TPP is circumventing the WTO. You know.
Well, ironically, if you ask the pharma companies, they'll say they're virtually the only industry that didn't get what they wanted in the TPP agreement. So they might have a different point of view. But I will say,
they're not happy. You're saying, right?
No, they're not particularly pleased with the outcome. They wanted stronger protections for some pharmaceutical.
But they've been given
IP.
some.
There have been some important provisions, and largely those track what we've seen in U.S. law as well as European law, and we believe reflect a proven model. And I'll tell you exactly what those provisions tend to do. You know, beyond the basic 20-year term of patent protection, there are a number of mechanisms that provide greater certainty in the market. You know, things like patent linkage mechanisms, which require the regulatory agency to check on whether there's a patent on a product before granting approval to a generic competitor, for instance. And what those mechanisms do is reduce the need for expensive litigation that makes already costly products even more expensive. So I view those largely as rule of law mechanisms that help to create certainty in the marketplace, help give companies the certainty so they can invest with confidence.
So Patrick, why do you think the WTO has not been able to work out a reasonable patent regime which is acceptable to all the parties, you know?
I'll tell you exactly why I think that's been a problem. I think you've got a handful of countries that already have strong IP regimes and that produce most of the really cutting edge new innovations, and they're seen as producers of innovation. Then you've got a group of countries that includes some very developed economies that see themselves as net purchasers or importers of innovative products. And this creates this characterization, which is usually a self-characterization, creates a mindset that lends itself to policies that suppress IP and actually suppress domestic innovation. So you've got a negative cycle going there. Our message is let's break that cycle. Let's convince countries at every level of development to invest in a stronger IP model so that we can create the conditions for domestic innovators to succeed. And what IP really does at its core is to turn an idea and take an idea and turn it into a legal asset that can hold value. And you can take that and take it to a venture capitalist if you're a startup company. If you're a small business, use it as collateral at the bank. If you're a multinational company, then you're able to report, you do your fiduciary duty to shareholders by reporting accurately on the value of the assets you hold. But by containing value, it takes an idea, it turns it into an asset that can be leveraged. This is true not just in the United States or Europe or Japan. It's true in India, and a similar system, rigorously and thoroughly implemented, could really set loose all the innovative capacity of, 1 billion and more Indians who are ready to bring their ideas to the world. And I'll tell you, when we look at problems, you mentioned climate change, we look at problems like that, and we need a 1 in a billion idea. Well, we don't have 1 billion people in the United States. We only have 300 million. But when I look for a 1 in a billion solution, I'm looking to India.
So basically, you're saying that that both sides, the developed world, which currently innovates more and invests in innovation, and the developing world, which is also investing not so much, but is a bigger consumer of innovation. Each side should go that extra mile and reach that golden mean where both sides have the due, right? So that's the point finally you're making, right?
Right, and I'll just say I wish that there was less suspicion of private sector, in the for-profit world, because in my experience, the companies we work with have always been willing to go the extra mile to make sure their products get in the hands of the people who need them. So
let's hope that we reach that trade-off, that optimal trade-off sometime in the future. Thank you very much, Patrick, for talking to us. That's all we have in this edition of State of the Economy. We'll be back with you next week. Thanks for watching.